Before we start, I want to say something that might sound a little controversial. Most people read the Folk of the Air trilogy as enemies to lovers fantasy, but after finishing all three of the books, I realized that romance is actually the least interesting part of the story. Hi everyone and welcome back to Stories and Sanity. If you are new here, I am Vedanshi and today we are talking about the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black, The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing. Yes, there is romance in this series, but what really drives the story is ambition, political power, and the journey of a human girl trying to claim space in a world that constantly tells her she doesn't belong. So, in this video, I want to walk through the storyline of the trilogy, the characters, and why I personally think this series was never really about romance in the first place. So, let's start from the beginning. So, the story begins with Jude Duarte when she is only 7 years old. Her parents are murdered by a fairy general named Maddox, who then takes Jude and her twin sister Taryn and their elder sister Vivian, who was actually Maddox's firstborn, to live with him in the High Court of Faerie. Which means Jude grows up human in a world that absolutely despises humans. The fairies are beautiful, powerful, immortal, but they are also manipulative, cruel, and deeply political. And Jude spends most of her childhood reminded that she does not belong there. One of the people who makes that especially clear is Prince Cardan, the youngest son of the High King. Cardan and his friends constantly bully and humiliate Jude because she is human. Now, this is where I think readers often focus on the wrong thing. People see the bullying and immediately frame it as enemies to lovers, but what actually defines Jude's character here is not attraction, it's ambition. Jude doesn't want Cardan's attention, she wants power in Faerie. She trains with swords, learns court politics, and slowly begins inserting herself into dangerous political situations. When the royal succession becomes unstable and betrayals start happening within the royal family, Jude manipulates events so that Cardan becomes the king. And here's the twist, he becomes king under her control, and that moment is where the story really shifts because the cruel prince now sits on the throne while the human girl is secretly controlling the crown. Now, in The Wicked King, Cardan is officially king, but Jude believes she is the one truly running the court. And this is where the series becomes really political. Jude is managing threats from the other fairy courts, dealing with spies, assassination attempts, and betrayals from people she thought she could trust. She is constantly calculating. And what I really love about this book is that nobody is purely innocent. Jude manipulates people, Cardan manipulates people, everyone is playing a game. Their relationship also becomes more complicated there. There is attraction, yes, but there is also mistrust, resentment, and vulnerability. It's less enemies to lovers and more like two people trying to outplay each other while secretly realizing how much the other person matters. And then the ending of this book completely flips the power dynamics. Carden makes a decision that strips Jude of all the power in a single move. Suddenly, the girl who orchestrated everything loses control. And that moment perfectly captures what this series is actually about. Power is never permanent. Then we reach the final book, The Queen of Nothing. This story begins with Jude exiled from Faerie and living in the human world, and for the first time, she is removed from the political game that defined her identity. She is no longer manipulating court politics or controlling outcomes. She is just Jude. But of course, Fairy doesn't stay peaceful for long. War is brewing, prophecies begin unfolding, and Cardan himself becomes trapped in a magical curse that threatens the stability of the throne. Jude is forced to return to Fairy, not just to save Cardan, but to confront what she truly wants. Is it revenge? Is it love? Or is it the power she spent her entire life chasing? What makes this final book satisfying is that the emotional resolution isn't dramatic, isn't overly romantic, it's quieter. Jude and Cardan finally stop trying to dominate each other and start understanding each other. Not perfect love, but earned partnership. So, when I finished the trilogy, the thing that stayed with me wasn't the romance, it was the themes. This story explores ambition and power, belonging in the hostile environments, identity and survival, and the idea that vulnerability doesn't make you weak. Jude's motivation isn't love, her motivation is control. She wants to never feel powerless again, and that's the really interesting character arc because she isn't a soft heroine, she is strategic, sometimes ruthless, but always determined. One of the reasons this trilogy works so well is Holly Black's writing style. She writes fairy the way traditional folklore describes it, beautiful but dangerous. Nothing in this world is purely good or evil. Characters are morally grey, politeness hides threats, and alliances are always temporary. Structurally, the trilogy escalates very intentionally. The cruel prince introduces the power hierarchy. The wicked king intensifies the political game. The queen of nothing resolves the emotional consequences. So, if you're reading this trilogy only for enemies to lovers romance, you'll probably enjoy it, but you'll miss what makes the story truly interesting because at its core the folk of the air is about ambition. It's about a human girl refusing to accept the role she was given. Jude Duarte doesn't want sympathy, she wants a seat at the table, and that determination is what made this trilogy so compelling to me. So now I'm curious, when you think about this trilogy, do you remember the romance first or do you remember the power struggles? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for spending this chapter with me on Stories and Sanity. I'll see you in the next story.